Welcome, everyone, to another edition of 45 Forward, where our mission is to help you, our listeners from Los Angeles to Long Island, make your second half of life even better than the first. Each May, we commemorate Older Americans Month. Ever since President John F. Kennedy issued a formal proclamation in 1963, asking the nation to encourage and recognize the countless contributions that older Americans make to our communities. This year, the Administration for Community Living, an agency of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, known as ACL, will lead the observance of Older Americans Month with the theme Age My Way, focusing on how older adults can plan to stay in their homes and be involved in their communities for as long as possible. In today's episode, Rhonda Schwartz, a regional administrator for the Administration for Community Living, will explain the agency's broad mission to maximize the independence and health and well-being of older adults and people with disabilities, as well as their families and caregivers. Indeed, all people, regardless of age and disability, deserve to live with dignity, make their own choices, and participate fully in society. This is also the 10th anniversary of the creation of ACL, and Rhonda will discuss how the agency has evolved over the years to more fully integrate its work for both the aging and disabilities communities. She'll talk about the agency's approach to promoting planning, participation, accessibility, and making connections, all of which play a role in aging in place, emphasizing that what each person needs and prefers is unique. She'll explain how the pandemic affected the delivery of vital ACL programs and services, and how the agency has adapted and continues to deal with the challenges of social isolation, stress, and mental health. And Rhonda will weigh in on the agency's and her own efforts to reframe how we view aging, to recognize how older people not only contribute to the economy, but offer wisdom, their time, experience, and talents to enrich the lives of those around them. So now, Rhonda, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ron. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. So, Rhonda, there's a lot to talk about ACL and about Older Americans Month. But I'd like to start too. My show is 45 Forward, and I find that not only do my guests have a lot to say, but they have interesting lives. And so, why don't we start off by telling us how you came to your current position? Because it's an interesting, winding road you've taken.
I'd be happy to do that. And that's exactly the phrase I was going to use, a winding path that I took to get here. It was not a straight line by any means. I started out working in my career as an attorney in private practice. I was focusing on commercial real estate work in New York City, and I enjoyed it for a really long time. I enjoyed it quite a bit, and I worked with some great people. The people were fabulous, who I had the privilege to work with. But over time, I just started to feel somewhat less fulfilled by my work that I was doing. And 9/11 happened. And then about 6 months after that, my grandmother passed away. And that was
Wow.
the first relative who I had lost as an adult. And that really affected me. And I just really started thinking about what I wanted out of life. And I said to myself, I was going to be approaching 40. And I said to myself, if I wake up when I'm 50 and this is what I'm doing, I think I'm going to regret it. And I just
Uh-huh.
really, spent some time thinking. And I had been doing a lot of volunteer work throughout my life. So I would do it on the side, as an outside interest, as an aside to my legal work. I even, in high school, we had to do a senior project. And for
Mhm.
my senior project, I volunteered at a nursing home. And some of the volunteer activities that I participated in throughout my legal work were activities that were related to aging and older people. And I knew that was where my interest was. And
Mhm.
instead of just doing public interest kind of activities as a hobby kind of on the side, I decided I wanted to transition into that full time.
Right.
And I even went to meet with a career counselor thinking maybe they could give me some advice. And I was a little shocked because the career counselor made me feel as though it was getting late in life for me to think about making this career change. And I honestly thought that was ridiculous. I was, just about 40 years old. And why can't I make a change in what I do? I didn't think that was reasonable. So I stopped talking to that career counselor and just started talking to other people and getting some ideas. And given my interest in public service and my legal background, the idea of going into social work made sense to me. And there are different areas of social work. There's clinical, there's also policy and administrative type activities. And I was really more drawn to the policy side of social work, given my legal background. And so I ended up leaving my job, and I went to school to get a Master of Social Work degree. I ended up at a state aging department, and I worked there for several years, and I was overseeing Older Americans Act programs, and I became aware of the Administration on Aging, which eventually became the Administration for Community Living. And I thought that might be an interesting place to work. And eventually a position opened up at ACL that I was able to apply for. And I started my career at ACL.
Wow, that's a great story. And I think an important story. I think, so many people, especially young people, think, well, you go to school, you go to college, and you have a career. And I think that most careers are a combination of accident and intention, right? I mean, you start one way, but you evolve as a person, right? And I
Right.
think that many people, your first 20 years is a fine path, but then you realize, well, I'm changing, and then you start thinking about how you want to make a contribution in life. And I think that more and more people are going to be doing what you do. Yeah, I hope,
I
to
hope so
really,
too.
yeah, to really think through life and recognize, well, that's just another chapter. And you may well have another chapter after this, I certainly have had a number of chapters, and I think it's important for people to recognize that's what also keeps us vital is being in touch with what really motivates us, and recognize that it may change as we age. So, um,
And it can be scary
mhm,
to make this kind of a change, and you need to decide for your own circumstances what is right for you. But I certainly would not want anyone to feel, if they're in some kind of career that they're not happy in, that they can't change things and change their life. You spend so much time working. It really would be great if people could enjoy what they do.
yeah, I agree with you, and I think that yes, there's always risk. Every time you make a change, there's some risk involved.
Mhm.
You don't know what's going to happen exactly, but that's what life is about, taking risks. And as a colleague of mine told me a little while ago, the goal in life is to keep making mistakes, just keep making better ones.
Exactly. And I will tell you, I had no idea what I was going to be able to do when I got that social work degree. And I had gone to school full time. I wasn't working. I really had absolutely no idea. But if you move forward, it just seems like opportunities open up for you if you're on the lookout for them.
Right. That's the key, is being on the lookout for them. That's true. That's true. So now let's change our lookout to looking at the ACL and its mission.
Yes.
So actually, my first guest had on my show last year was your predecessor in
Yeah.
your job, and but it's been a year, more than almost a year and a half since then. So lots happened with ACL, but maybe we could just talk a little bit about, refresh people about, the mission of the agency, a little bit about how it blends two different or similar communities. But what are your goals? What are the goals of the agency?
Absolutely. That's a great place to start our conversation today. And I can't thank my predecessor enough for, she actually hired me at
Ah, okay,
ACL.
okay.
So she's a great mentor to me. So let me just get to ACL's mission, which you mentioned it actually earlier when you were introducing the program today. But our mission is to maximize the independence, well-being, and health of older adults, people with disabilities across the lifespan. That means throughout their entire life, and their families and caregivers.
Right.
And ACL was created, as you mentioned, I think also earlier on, around the fundamental principle that everybody, regardless of their age or disability, should be able to live independently and participate in their communities as much as they wish. We take a person-centered approach to things.
Hmm.
We believe that everybody has the right to make their own choices and to control decisions about their lives.
Right.
No, okay.
Go ahead. No, yeah, go ahead.
I did want to mention, I mean, you asked me to talk a little bit about how we've evolved over the
Right.
years and
Sure.
how ACL started. So I do want to talk about a couple things about that. So
Hmm.
this year happens to be ACL's 10th anniversary.
Right.
We're actually a relatively young federal agency
Right.
as those agencies go. If you like, I can go into a bit of our history and evolution.
Sure. And I'll follow up with a couple of questions, but absolutely, let's do that first.
Sure. So, of course, ACL was formed in 2012, actually in April of 2012, which, of course, is why we just had our 10-year anniversary. And it combined the Administration on Aging, the Department of Health and Human Services Office on Disability, as well as the Administration on Developmental Disabilities. So those three offices were combined to form the initial ACL. And then in 2014, we added to our portfolio the State Health Insurance Assistance Program. That's commonly known as SHIP, or in New York, it's known as the HICAP program. That program used to be with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, but again, that was transitioned over to ACL in 2014. And that was followed in 2015 by the transfer of the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, as well as the Independent Living and Assistive Technology Program to ACL from the Department of Education. And that same year, the Limb Loss Resource Center was transferred from CDC to ACL.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, in 2016, Congress transferred the Traumatic Brain Injury Program from the Health Resources and Services Administration to ACL. So over time, we've added in mostly, mainly some more programs focusing on disability.
Right.
And you see, Ron, as one agency, we're better able to leverage knowledge and best practices to meet the similar needs of people with disabilities and older people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, there are times when the consolidation and streamlining, helps collaboration. And I think that this is a case where, you folks have done that. And it's done in sort of a step-by-step evolutionary way. I think for me, one of the important things is that the essence of your mission deals with a lot of things that Americans are worried about, which is, they want to stay in their homes, or they want to age in place, whatever place that is. Sometimes the place is a different geographical place. Sometimes it's a different kind of, residency. But I think that, that they need some guidance and tools about how to do this and what's available to help them do that. And I think that they want to stay in their community, whatever that community is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the misconceptions is that, people, I think, especially now, there are lots of questions about, well, what is the government doing? And I think that, to me, this is where the government really can be a partner in your life. It's not saying the government is going to take care of you, but there are resources that we can share as communities. And I know that, you do a lot of partnering with local agencies, right? So you drive down the services. Talk a little bit about that. How do you work with the local, I guess they're called AAAs, right?
Sure. I'm happy to talk about our Older Americans Act work, but I do want to mention before we get to that, what you were talking about, supporting folks and everybody wants to age in place. I do just want to mention some statistics for you that I think people will find interesting. So by 2040, there are going to be about 80 million people in the United States who are 65 and older. That's more than twice as many people who are 65 and older as there were in 2000.
Right.
That's a huge increase. And the 85 and older population is projected to more than double,
right,
from 6.6 million in 2019 to more than 14 million in 2040. So we've got to find ways to support more and more people to age in place and stay at home. And a lot of the programs that ACL is focusing on, in particular the Older Americans Act, which I'm going to get into in a second, because we raised our area agencies on aging, our programs get at the social determinants of health. I don't know if that's a term that you're familiar with, but those are social conditions that are seen as affecting people's health. Things like your degree of economic security, your access to education and healthcare, what your neighborhood is like. Is there a lot of violence in your neighborhood? Do you have access to transportation? Do you have clean drinking water? Things like that. A lot of ACL's programs are getting at those social determinants of health. Social determinants of health, I've seen different estimates of anywhere from like have determined something like 60 to 80% of your health. of your overall health. And a lot of the work that our agencies are doing is getting at those social determinants of health. And that, my friend, is the Older Americans Act and our area agencies on aging. So I'm happy to talk to you about those services and programs that we're doing that are helping people to age in place.
Yeah, let's move on. Let's get to that. Sure.
Okay, so the Older Americans Act, of course, funding comes from Congress to ACL. ACL then distributes that funding based on population figures to the states and territories that participate in the Older Americans Act program. Each state has a state unit on aging. And then that state, in turn, distributes those funds to its area agencies on aging in order to provide services at the local level to folks. The idea is that it's the local provider agencies who are in the communities know best how to serve people in their communities. So we're pushing the funding down, and it's the area agencies on aging who are contracting to provide the services in their communities. And in some cases, depending on the service, they may provide the service directly themselves. And I'm happy to talk to you about the variety of services that we provide.
Sure. We're gonna take a break shortly, but why don't we start on that and then we'll continue after. But so let's give a couple of examples.
Sure. One example is, of course, I think our best known program, the Home Delivered Meal Program, which is offered under Title III-C of the Older Americans Act. We also have the Congregate Meal Program, where people go to senior centers and enjoy lunch together. Under Title III-B of the Older Americans Act, we offer a variety of supportive services. There's a large laundry list of services that states and AAAs are allowed to provide, and they select the services they want to provide. They provide in-home services and personal care services, case management services, senior center activities, legal assistance, and a variety of other kinds of services for folks under Title III-B.
Good. Okay. So we're going to take a hold that thought.
Okay.
We need to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll be talking much more with Rhonda Schwartz. So folks, we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, folks. We're talking today with Rhonda Schwartz, the Regional Administrator for Region 2 of the Administration for Community Living, which includes New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands for our area. So, of course, there are different regions around the country, and a lot of their correlate administrators in different regions. So before the break, we were talking to Rhonda about various services that ACL provides and how these services are driven down through local agencies to the local levels and local organizations. We were talking about, the delivery of home delivered meals and congregate meals, which is a big deal. I think people don't realize, there is definitely a need among seniors, not only in terms of the accessibility of food and the cost of food these days, which has gone up tremendously, but the availability and delivery of them. And it's been a major issue too with the pandemic, because a lot of these programs have been temporarily suspended. So talk to me, Ron, about how you folks have dealt with the pandemic, because a lot of the programs we had originally face to face, and how have you adapted and made changes in the programs?
I'm happy to talk about that, Ron. And I want to start out by telling you how proud I am of the heroic efforts on the part of our aging network in getting services to folks during this pandemic. It was, as I said, nothing short of heroic. They really have done an amazing job. And you mentioned meals. Of course, our congregate meal sites all had to shut down during the initial stages of the pandemic, and many of them are still not, fully functioning in their
Right.
former iterations. And we needed to get meals to people. There were people who were socially isolating, who perhaps in another time might have gone to a restaurant or to a congregate meal site. And we needed to get food to these people. They needed to get nutrition. And so our program shifted and greatly increased the number of home delivered meals that were served. And I just want to give you some statistics, because I think it's really incredible. So in 2019, our network served just under about 150 million home delivered meals. In 2021, that number had increased to 226 million
Wow.
home delivered meals. And in terms of people served, In 2019, we served approximately 880,000 people in the home delivered meal program. That had increased to about 1.5 million people in 2021. And our network was able to accomplish this.
Wow.
And I'd love to tell you, like, there was this really interesting innovation that many of them came up with that I think you'll
Sure.
find very interesting. So, of course, during the initial stages of the pandemic, restaurants were shutting down, or they were just doing takeout meals. They were really struggling and really
Right.
needed revenue. And by the same token, at the same time, our area agencies on aging and our food providers, they needed to greatly increase their capacity. They were having capacity issues.
Hmm.
So in many parts of the country, our network partnered with restaurants.
Hmm.
And the restaurants provided catering services for our programs. And that's how many of our programs were able to meet this need. So that's an example that shows a really great innovation that helped our program and also helped the restaurant industry. So I was really proud of that. I thought that was a great innovation on
Yeah.
the part of our programs.
Yeah. It seems to me that some of these can be adapted in the future. I mean, I know that, as rough as it has been with the pandemic, certainly you cannot minimize the loss of life. But at the same time, there were a few silver linings and certain things we learned about, how to move forward with, what is now known as a hybrid life.
Yeah.
And I think that, it has enabled us to, to reach out to people who previously were kind of marginalized by the fact that they couldn't get to locations sometimes. So let's talk a little bit more about that in terms of the issues of social isolation, because that certainly you've developed some innovative workarounds in that capacity. Are there other things that you've done in that like that? And I know and with the Older Americans Month too, there's a special focus too on social isolation. Talk about how you're dealing with that for both people in the disabilities community as well as the older Americans community.
Right. Well, for innovations that have been developed as part of the pandemic, other things that were something related, I would say, to the meals program is we developed this grab and go meal concept.
Oh,
So
nice.
people could go to the site where they normally would get a congregate meal and take that meal home with them. So that was an innovation that I think is probably going to continue in some shape or form
Right.
going forward. And especially as this pandemic or endemic or whatever situation that we're in, things are different. As you said, there's a new normal. So there will be times when having that kind of a system set up, a grab and go meal kind of concept, may be something that is appropriate. Some of our agencies did virtual congregate meals. So
Hmm.
folks would enjoy their meal together virtually.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of different activities were developed: wellness checks, telephone reassurance calls, teleconferencing with folks, like case management services perhaps provided over via tablet or via a teleconference. Some of our agencies were able to provide tablets to folks and to teach them how to use them so folks could connect. There were also some really low-tech things that were done
Hmm.
that were very simple, that were great to do. For example, drive-by car parades, just to let folks know that you still were aware of them, or doing bingo over the telephone. I heard of a AAA that provided seeds to older adults with instructions so they could do their own gardening and grow
Hmm.
gardens at their homes, for those folks who had that ability to do that. So there were lots of different ideas that folks came up with. Even one agency I heard of delivered vases of flowers to women on Mother's Day.
Oh, that's great.
So that people would know they're still thinking of them. And these telephone wellness checks, those have really, people have really liked those. They like hearing from someone. They like knowing that someone is calling them. That's been an interesting innovation, that folks like knowing that they're being checked up on.
Yeah.
And also ACL at the national level
Mm-hmm.
developed something called the Commit to Connect campaign.
Uh-huh.
And that's very interesting. So ACL wanted to tackle the challenge of isolation, both for the pandemic, but for the future, not just for the pandemic, but beyond. So ACL has partnered with other partners from the federal government, from the aging and disability networks, from philanthropy, and from industry. And they've created this campaign called the Commit to Connect campaign. And the hope is to build a nationwide network of folks to collaborate on solutions to help us reach more people. There's hope to develop an online tool that people can use to access resources and services and to develop partnerships across government. On our website, if you go to the Commit to Connect section of our website, you can find ideas that have been submitted to ACL from different places for how to fight social isolation, resources and services that are available out there, and even assessment tools that people can use to assess if someone is at risk of loneliness or depression.
Yeah, that's great. So give us the URL for that website. That's it.
Oh, that I don't know. You'd have to go
Okay.
to acl.gov
Right.
and just in the search, put in Commit to Connect,
Okay. Well, that's the way to do it. acl.gov.
acl.gov. Yeah,
That's good enough, and then people can log on and look for that Commit to Connect, or just search for that, and they'll find it. Good.
sure.
Yeah, because that's really critical. And I think that it's, this recognition about social isolation and connection is really critical. I've done some shows on this, and I think that I guess there are just a number of components. I think first of all, I don't think, again, I think the pandemic, for better or worse, helped us focus on social isolation and also issues of mental health that were always there, but really were highlighted and basically spotlighted by the pandemic and
Yep.
the importance of social connection. I mean, I think that, one of the um, perhaps not much thought about aspects of there's also been a huge surge in financial fraud and scams, right? And some of that I think is unfortunately attributed to the fact that when people, especially seniors who are lonely, get calls from people, it's like someone is calling them, and unfortunately it's someone who was involved in a scam. But I think that's they're receptive to those kinds of calls, whereas if you had other ways of social connection, that's an important component to kind of at least have a check on that kind of activity.
That's an interesting point, that if people, weren't so desperate for a connection, maybe they wouldn't be so susceptible to fraud. And you're right, there does seem to be a lot of that going on, in particular with scammers committing fraud regarding Medicare, trying to get your Medicare information.
Exactly. Yeah.
I heard this morning of some scam where people are being called and are being told that their Medicare cards, because of the pandemic, are going to be replaced with plastic Medicare
Yeah.
cards. And so the scammers are trying to get their information
Yeah.
that way. So that is an issue. And I do want to mention, Ron,
Yeah.
I want to mention, so the Older Americans Act is sensitive to these issues and the concerns about social isolation. I just want to mention, in the 2020 reauthorization of the Older Americans Act,
Hmm.
screening for suicide risk and screening for the negative health effects associated with social isolation, that's a hard phrase to pronounce,
Right.
were added to the definition of disease prevention and health promotion services that can be provided under the Older Americans Act. And in addition, mental and behavioral health screenings, as well as screenings for the negative health effects associated with social isolation, are permitted uses of Title III-B funds under the Older Americans Act. So there has been an attempt to, update the Older Americans Act to address these issues as well. And
Right.
I don't know if you want to talk about Older Americans Month, because you mentioned
Yes,
that.
I will. Just before we move on
Yeah.
to that, I just wanted to mention, yeah. So who makes use of these funds? Is it, again, programs at the local level, the local agencies?
Right. So these would be AAAs, the area agencies on aging, making the decisions about the services they're going to provide at the local level.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think those are really critical too, because I think once again, there are lots of studies that are beginning to show the relationship between social isolation and lifespan, longevity.
Yeah.
We don't know the exact components leading to what, but we know that those who are in social isolation don't live as long. So I mean, I think that it's a real phenomenon that we're starting to quantify the importance of it. As you pointed out, the social determinants of health.
Yeah.
What sorts of things contribute to our overall health, not just our medical well-being. Um,
Right. And did you know today is Older Adult Mental Health Awareness Day?
no, I did not.
So that
Okay.
was started in 2018.
Okay.
And ACL partners with the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration to present the Older Adult Mental Health Awareness Day Symposium. It actually is happening right now.
Right.
I think
Right.
it's finishing up
Yeah,
today.
yeah, and I think too one of the things that's become clear too is for a lot of reasons where we're starting to connect the mental health issues of both older people and younger people that many of these stressors are on, especially folks in their teens and 20s. So I think that this intergenerational connection has brought a focus on these mental health issues that I think in
Yes.
many helpful ways destigmatize these issues and make them the funding available, and awareness available. So now, as you just mentioned, let's transition to looking at the Older Americans Month and some of the activities and opportunities people have to participate.
I'm happy to do that. So I'm very
Great.
excited. I like this year's theme. You mentioned it earlier. It's Age My Way. And so every May, the Administration for Community Living leads our nation's observance of Older Americans Month.
Hmm.
And each year, ACL provides the theme. And so this year, as you mentioned earlier, also, we're focusing on aging in place.
Hmm.
So, how older adults can plan to stay in their homes and live independently in their communities for as long as possible. And I think the 2022 theme is very aptly named Age My Way. It presents an opportunity for us to explore the many ways older adults can remain in and stay connected to their communities. Now, I just want to point out to you some information here. According to data from ACL's 2020 profile of
Right.
older Americans, this is some data to think about as we think about aging in place. 20% of men and more than 30% of women over the age of 65 live alone.
Mm.
And more than 60% of women over the age of 85 live alone. And 30% of women over the age of 65 are widowed.
Hmm.
And 40% of people 65 and over have some difficulty with mobility.
Right.
And so, Ron, at some point in our lives, something like 60% of us are going to need help with
Hmm.
things like getting dressed, getting to appointments, or making meals for ourselves. Most of us who turn 65 should expect to need some form of long-term care assistance at some point in our lives. But most of us have not started to save for that.
Hmm. Hmm. And are there things that ACL does in terms of helping people understand this issue and communicating with them, or and communicating with potential partners or people in the news media?
When you talk about the need for planning and saving for
Mm-hmm.
long-term care, certainly we do have resources on our website that
Mm-hmm.
address these topics, and our area agencies on aging, through their funding under the Older Americans Act, they can provide assistance to folks in these planning services.
Yeah, so I think that's important for people to know that, to reach out. And because I think one of the issues is that there are lots of resources available through a whole assortment of agencies. But one of the things that I've found over the years is that you receive funding for staffing, for research, for programs, but one of the areas that you don't receive much funding for is communications and outreach. And so people need to be aware of them, and be somewhat proactive in finding out what your local agency on aging is. In my area, it's on a county level. Um, but you can find out too by going to often your local senior center and finding out from there what the funding is, where you get information. And I think that senior centers again are resources that people think, oh, senior center, yeah, well, I'll go there sometime. They've become quite robust in terms of what they can do, and in terms of their coordinating about providing programs and information, and partnering with local libraries. So I want to we'll talk more about that, but we're going to take another quick break. So, folks, don't go anywhere again. Once again, we'll have one more terrific segment coming up as we conclude our conversation with Rhonda Schwartz. So, don't go anywhere. Come right back. Welcome back, folks. Again, we're talking with Rhonda Schwartz, a regional administrator for the Administration for Community Living. And before the break, we were talking to Rhonda about the agencies leading Older Americans Month and some of the activities that it involves. So I wanted to continue along those lines and ask Rhonda about some of the programs and some of the things that people should watch out for. For the May is Older Americans Month, so we still have another month to go, and certainly we can continue looking at these issues beyond May.
Oh, happy to talk about that, Ron. Thank you. These programs that you would see for Older Americans Month generally would be happening at the local level and the regional level. So folks should reach out to their local senior center to see what activities are going on in their community. But I do want to mention there are four main elements of our theme of Age My Way this year. So, and they're pretty important. So I want to just go through each one. The first is engagement, and we have focused on that in different aspects today. That is remaining involved in your community and contributing to your community through work or through volunteering or some other kind of civic participation opportunity. And of course, connection, as we've mentioned earlier, connection is so important to your health. Maintaining social activities and relationships to combat social isolation and stay connected in your community. And then accessibility is important, making home improvements and modifications using assistive technologies and customizing supports to help you to better age in place and stay in your home. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, planning. Think about what you'll need and about what you'll want. Again, not just about what you'll need, but what do you want in the future? What do you want your future to look like? From home and community-based services to activities that interest you, to financial and estate planning. All of these things are important. And all of these elements, engagement, connection, accessibility, and planning, they all play a role in aging in place. And what everybody needs and prefers is unique. What each person wants and needs is going to be unique. And so at ACL, we would like to see everybody being able to age in each person's own way.
Right, right. And I think, apropos of my show and my theme of 45 forward, I think it's important to start thinking about these, earlier in life. I think many people may be thinking about it at midlife because they're caring for older parents and are looking at some of the issues that you mentioned before about the need for long-term care. But indeed, as you mentioned, preparing is important in terms of foreseeing what you want it to look like. And I think there's a process, I think it's often called reverse engineering, sort of, which is that you say, well, okay, what do I want my life to look like at 65 or 75? And then what do I need to do now to make sure that happens, that vision comes true? So I think that the planning part of it, you don't have to plan it all at once, but start making some steps to do so. And I think that, in many cases, people are kind of triggered by looking ahead and seeing what their parents are going through, but there's no reason you can't concurrently think about them and thinking about yourself. So I think this is something that, again, you and I've talked about too, this element of what these four things you mentioned involved too, is the increasing importance of caregiving in our society. And, years ago, I think there was certainly especially as women entered the workplace more and more, the notion that there was, the work and family balance and childcare. And now, of course, we talk about the sandwich generation, right? People who are taking care of kids and taking care of older parents. And I think that, and what I have sort of coined is the going from the sandwich generation to the club sandwich generation, which is that you get now older people taking care of even older people. And I know that this is so you have parents that are elderly, and so tell us a little bit about your caregiving experience and how you've dealt with that.
Well, I've actually been pretty fortunate. My parents are 89 and 91.
Wow.
But they've been pretty self-sufficient. So while I need to assist them with things like, the household activities and things like that, and going shopping. There's a lot that my parents fortunately are able to do for themselves. So I am able to work and to provide my caregiving duties. But I think there are a lot of people who are not as fortunate as I am as a caregiver. And there's so much stress on caregivers. Some people have to leave their jobs. It's some people have to move to different parts of the country to take care of their aging parents. The stress on caregivers is extreme, and I think the pandemic has only exacerbated that. Something like more than 50 million people, I believe, are providing caregiving assistance to loved ones in an unpaid, informal manner. And the value
Right.
of that is into the billions of dollars. They are the backbone
Right.
of our caregiving workforce. And
Right.
and this is Ron, is kind of bringing us back to the start of our conversation. People want to stay home. They want to live in their homes. They want to have as fulfilling a life as they can. And this is, caregivers are helping our older relatives to stay in their homes. I'm curious if you have an idea what percentage of people in the United States actually live in nursing homes.
I don't have that figure. No, I'm not. So tell me.
It's a very small number.
Mhm.
Only just over 2% of the older adult population live in nursing homes. That would be people 65 and older.
Right.
Only just over 2.2%. The percentage increases with age. So for people, actually, it's 1% for people 65 to 74. It's 2% for people
Mhm.
75 to 84, and then 8% for people over the age of 85. But most people are living in the community, and thank goodness that's where they want to be, and that's where our families want to help them be. And again, the unpaid informal caregiver is the backbone of our caregiving workforce in this country.
Right. Yeah, I think that there has been a lot of attention on nursing homes, and I think also because of the pandemic, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they were shut down. People were not able to see their elderly loved ones. There were some issues, well, in where I live in New York about, underreporting of numbers of COVID deaths and so forth. Some unfortunate statistics. But as you point out, I mean, the idea is, and nursing homes have a specific purpose too. I mean, it's when people really are medically unable to stay in their homes for various reasons. So, so there's an important reason for why they exist.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
but as you said, the number is smaller than people think. And I think one of the issue too is that it's expensive. So people can, the better option is to figure out ways that they can stay in their homes. So obviously there are other opportunities to where group homes or assisted living communities. So there are more options these days, I think, that people have, and I think more options for different ways to stay in their community. Um, whether it's sometimes sharing homes between seniors and younger people. So there are more options. Uh, but I think that the overall issue is how do you keep doing this, and how do you find a way to sort of normalize it, and I guess the last thing that I want to mention with respect is, as you mentioned earlier, Rhonda. I mean, the stress on people can be enormous. Um, what makes it difficult? Well, often it's because someone may be living in New York, where I am, but their parents are in North Carolina or in Arizona or in Florida. So you have long distance issues about taking care of your parents. And that's where I think people really, in terms of planning, need to think about organizations and agencies like yours. Because that's what, in terms of one of the things I know you've talked about is the issue of self-care, right? How caregivers take care of themselves. And one of the critical things is being aware of other resources that can help you. You're not alone.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I'm happy to share some of those that we can provide for
sure.
folks.
Yeah, absolutely.
So first is our National Family Caregiver Support Program,
Great.
and that service is provided under Title III-E of the Older Americans Act. So
Mhm.
that would be provided through our AAA network, throughout the country. And under that program, education, training, caregiver support services, and counseling services are provided. And the all-important respite service is provided. So that's a service that gives a break to caregivers. And so that service is provided to caregivers of any age of older adults, or it could be someone under age 60 if they have Alzheimer's or a related dementia. But also that service is provided to older adult relatives who are caring for children
Mm-hmm.
and for certain younger adults with certain disabilities who meet the Older Americans Act requirements. So for the caregiver, of older relative caregiver of a child, it can't be their parent, but it could be another older relative related by blood.
Right.
Or some other relationship to the child.
Right. Right. And again, people find out about these programs. Can they find out about it by going to acl.gov, or would it be faster to go to their local agencies?
I think the best way to find out about how the program is being delivered in your community is to go to your senior center or to your area agency on aging. We also offer other services, Ron. So we have what's called a lifespan respite care program. That's a discretionary grant program. So not every state has it. They have to apply for it, and it is a competitive grant program. But that also is a program offering respite services to caregivers across the lifespan. So that's caregivers of people of all ages. So that includes children and older adults with certain disabilities. And it's caregivers of children with serious disabilities. But that's another program that's out there. And then another thing I want to mention is in 2021, ACL delivered 2 reports to Congress on issues facing family caregivers and recommendations for addressing them. One was under the RAISE Act, and RAISE stands for Recognize, Assist, Include, Support, and Engage Family Caregiver Act. And the other report was Supporting Grandparents Raising Grandchildren's report. So that was under the Supporting Grandparents Raising Grandchildren's Act. And under these 2 acts, ACL developed advisory committees that worked with ACL over a period of time to develop these recommendations. And ACL is now working with those advisory councils and with other federal partners to develop a national caregiving strategy, which will be delivered to Congress this fall, or it's due to be delivered to Congress this fall, I should say. And I do want to point out, Ron, if folks are looking, if you're a caregiver in one part of the country and your loved one is somewhere else, please feel free to reach out to the Elder Care Locator. That is a national hotline that connects older adults and their caregivers to services and resources throughout the U.S. So the Elder Care Locator, you can find it online just by entering Elder Care Locator into a search. I also have the phone number for that if you'd like me to share that. Folks call. It's 800-677-1116.
Okay.
That's a great service.
Yeah. Wow, there's a lot more to talk about, but unfortunately, we're gonna have to leave it there for today, Rhonda. I know we'll invite you back for another show. You have lots of ideas about aging in general. I think that many of us have had time to think about during the pandemic and have changed some of our priorities, and including us. I know you and me about deciding even to continue dyeing our hair and basically embracing our aging.
Exactly.
Right.
Oh, I'd love to come back and talk more.
Sure. But anyway, so thanks so much for a great conversation, Rhonda. And I want to tell folks again, if you miss, if they tell your friends, if they miss my conversation with Rhonda, you can listen to it as a podcast on voiceamerica.com. Search for my show 45 Forward. You can also go to my website, rowellresources.com, and just click on the 45 Forward tab. And you can listen to Rhonda's show as well as a whole list of my other shows over the last year or so. So, folks, be sure to join me next Monday, 12 noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, when I'll be talking with Sherry Coombs, who will talk about an intriguing trend in housing, especially for older families. They're called tiny homes, or sometimes a bit bigger than tiny, but smaller than average. So, folks, until then, keep moving forward, 45 forward.